Hi, I'm Ryan Berger, the publisher of Old School Gamer. You can check us out at oldschoolgamermagazine.com, and you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a very talented individual. Video games are part of everyone's life in some way, shape, or form, whether it was on the mobile devices, whether you spent way too much money in the arcades way back when. But I am so pleased to talk to this amazing video game magazine. We're joined by the ever-talented Ryan Berger, of course, from Old School Gamer Magazine. How you doing today?
Doing pretty good. It is a pleasure to be here with stuff. I mean, dialing in like this, dialing in. I'm using an old tech, using my modem to hook up on the interweb with you. This will be fun. I mean, I grew up in the 80s. I grew up playing video games, going to the local arcade, my Apple IIc computer, my own television. The kids have it so easy with these high-tech things that carry everything.
Yeah.
I'm a school teacher by day, and I put up this picture that shows all the technology that's wrapped up in a phone nowadays. You know, all the stuff they've got. It's so easy to get to. We had to ride our bikes to the mall to play games.
And when we got stuck on a Nintendo game, we had to get the magazine just to figure out how to beat it.
The magazine, and then later they came up with those 900 numbers. You had to pay by the minute to find out stuff. But yeah, you might have to wait. You pick up the latest game at Babbage's or GameStop here in the U.S., and you might have to wait till the cheat codes come out the next month, or your friends finish it. I don't know what it was like for you, but I had an Apple II computer. Another friend had the Commodore. Another friend had an IBM. We all had different stuff. And then we slowly, at least in my group of friends, all ended up with Apple II computers. Then we'd start, copying games and stuff like that. Other illegal things we did back in the 80s.
The good old days. I was more of a PC side, so I went from the Commodore 64 to the IBM 286, 386, 486, that era. I was trading video games by floppy disks trading. And so it got to the point where my local school board in high school stopped any discs from coming into the school because viruses were just all over the place.
Oh yeah.
The old monkey bee virus and the rock viruses. And
I remember the first virus I got on a computer to be when I was in college, and it just booted my computer up and said, "Your PC is stoned."
Yep. Stone virus.
You remember that one?
Yep. That monkey bee and stone were very rampant in my area here.
I was talking with a friend a couple of days ago, just BSing in the hallway, a teacher at school. And he said, "You remember how we used to clip the back of the floppies and save money on them? You had the good clippers where you just used a hole puncher."
Yeah. I'm jumping ahead of ourselves because we just love technology. We love talking about this stuff. For those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking.
Who I am, Ryan Berger, born in Cincinnati, Ohio, lived in Iowa ever since the early 80s. My dad was brought out here to help run a company. Grew up in the 80s, West Des Moines, Iowa. We had Valley West Mall was our arcade. The video game store that I like to go to was Babbage's. I worked there. Ask me about that later. I'll tell you a neat little story there. Went off to Iowa State University. Started a disc jockey company in the meantime, ran a bunch of stuff related to the DJ industry for about 20 years, a thing called Mobile Beat, disc jockey trade show and magazine. Got out of that, became a teacher. I'm a high school business ed and computers teacher in Perry, Iowa. In that mix a little bit there, about 5-6 years ago, created Old School Gamer Magazine. We're a retro gaming magazine. This is kind of my side thing. It's a hobby, but according to the IRS, it's a business. We've got about 1,000 subscribers. It's a print magazine that goes primarily in the U.S. We've got probably about 40 or 50 Canadian subscribers and a couple people in other parts of the world. It's kind of expensive to ship magazines anywhere but North America, so we don't have a lot of subscribers outside of there. The magazine covers what I consider retro, which is 25 years and back. So right now we are at the millennium. We are covering anything up to and not including HDMI related consoles. So back when we tuned to channel 3, or you had the yellow, white, and red cables, you plugged them in. Yeah, back when we had to actually do a little bit of work to play our video games.
Not to mention, blowing on the cartridges just to get them to actually work. Whether or not that was a true fact or not, it seemed to work.
Did you ever see the Goldbergs episode where they covered the Nintendo?
No, I missed that.
Goldberg's it's an 80s retro show about a kid growing up then, and he got out his Nintendo and actually blew on it, and all of us went, yes, that's exactly what has to happen. If he had not done that, it wouldn't have been authentic.
Nice. That's great. The fact that there are many treasured memories, and we kind of hinted at it as we were conversing before the show started, is just kind of what set us apart as geeks in the 80s and 70s, 80s and 90s, and when it wasn't popular to become a geek. What are some of your treasured memories from back then that you just sigh and think back on the nostalgia factor?
Well, back then, the computer kids were the nerds, the people that didn't have a lot of social lives. Our socializing was in the basement playing new games and copying them. Back to that Babbage's thing. Okay, so I opened up Babbage's. I opened up the store, which turns out to be a GameStop eventually. Our boss was great. We loved it because he believed that we needed to know what these games and software programs were like. So he let us take them home. And often before they got home, we wanted to, how do I say this nicely, play them longer than he had originally planned on us being able to play them. But we learned how to play the games. We just had to have them back by the next day, shrink wrapped and back on the shelf. I was a pretty good feed for games amongst some friends. Other memories back then. But yeah, I do remember the mall was a big place. That's where the video game store was. That's where the arcade was. In my case, it was a place called the Fun Factory. That's where we hung out. I loved playing games up there like Gauntlet. You get all your friends playing 4-player Gauntlet. There was a X-Men game that had 6 players on it, 2 screens, and we'd feed that sucker with quarters so much. That was the way we socialized. It was the whole thing of mom said you can stay out till the street lights come on, and then you got to come back inside. Riding a bike, riding a moped. Kids don't ride mopeds anymore. Our group of geeky friends, we had a lot of fun together. We didn't go on dates. We just kind of hung out. Yeah. But now the nerds of the 80s and 90s, let's see, nerd, how did it go? A friend of mine said once, nerd is a 4-letter word, but now it's a 6-figure one. the nerds of the 80s and 90s are now running the world. We're saying it up for all you guys. What you guys do with it, you millennials and you next gen people, what you guys do with it's going to be up to you. And I'm kind of worried, honestly.
I want to see a good VR game. I want to get to that level. We fantasized about it. We saw Tron. We saw these levels of games that the possibilities are endless. And I think technology is getting to that standpoint where we could actually get to that level. But we're still going to be at heart. We're still going to be the geeky 13-year-old in our basement playing games as it goes.
Ideally, once we get past VR, we get up to the holodeck, Star Trek style. Yes. That's where it really gets interesting, and I'm sure that's coming in our future sometime soon. All the stuff the kids, people are wearing nowadays and getting around that new Apple screen system. We're getting there. We were happy with our little games that came on a cartridge that didn't have to update, downloading 3 gigabytes of data to fix all the things they broke in the game.
I still have my original Game Boy with like 26 games, and it still works to this day, so I love it. It's awesome.
Stuff back then was built to last.
Oh, yeah. Looking at then the journey of Old School Gamer magazine, I think this is a great reflection on what it takes to run a business, to showcase what you're passionate about, and to really kind of break through the mold of what it means to share a passion with the masses with this vastly technologically advanced age these days. Is there a milestone or breakthrough in the coverage that you've done over the years that has really just had an impact on your readership?
We haven't had that big kick yet. We've talked with, people that formed Atari, people that are still running Atari. We've talked with all these people that made these games that I played back in the day. I was at a con, one of the first ones I did, and David Crane, who started Activision, made Pitfall and those things, just walked up to the booth and said hi. It's been at that level for a while, and I needed to really kick up a little bit more, and that's why we're trying to get the word out a little bit through people like yourself, and just try to hit a little bit more of the mainstream, because we've got 1,000 subscribers that pay to get our magazine. We have another 20,000 people that check out our free version of the magazine, but it hasn't hit that big kick yet. As you can see, I mean, we have Facebook people, but not a ton. It's still a side passion, and I don't honestly have a goal of doing it full time. I really enjoy my teaching. I would rather have a couple other people working full time on this magazine Well, I enjoy running it and not have to worry about the paychecks and stuff like that. We've been publishing for 6 years and it's going nice and it pays most of its own bills, but I have a lot of fun doing it. And that's what really matters for me.
Being a teacher, I think, is interesting too, because you're seeing the next generation of gamers. You're seeing the next generation of artists and creative people that are really just, they're finding themselves, but they're also pushing their own boundaries from a creative perspective. What is it about this generation that you're teaching that keeps you energized for what you're currently doing with Old School Gamer magazine?
This generation, especially the school I teach in, which is in a lower income town just outside Des Moines, it's called Perry, an industrial town. And I've seen that there are those 10 or 15% of the kids that are really driving hard, that are really wanting to go after things and look towards the future. There's that in-between group that is doing well with stuff. And then there's a bunch of kids, honestly, that just care about getting out of high school and getting further with stuff. So getting back to that top end group, I was with a group of students yesterday, National Honor Society students, taking them on some volunteer work. And talking with a couple of students, I mentioned to one student named Zoe that freshman year, she took a class of mine and she showed the promise of doing the assignments and showing passion with it. So I teach computer applications, Microsoft Word, video stuff. Duh, it's computers, games. It's me. Yeah. What she was showing is she got excited enough about this assignment that I said, you can make this brochure about anything you want to make it about. She said, well, I'm going to make it about my swim team. I'm going to lay out all the people's. And that's when you can tell a student is excited about something, is when they show passion about it. She was working on this coming in extra time. It's like, you've got your A, just so you know, you did great with this. Like, no, I want them to be able to use this for real. When a student goes past what's required of them, I list specs, you got to have this many pictures, this much text, this, and then just keeps on going. That's what gets people excited. It's that subset of the people that I think are really going to be creative and really go crazy with stuff. And I'm excited about some of the future. I'm worried about some of the future too, but I'm excited on a select group of people that have gone through my classroom. In the last, I've only been teaching for 5 years. In the last 5 years, I'm starting to get excited about these kids. Seeing them out in the wild. I had a couple students come to an event I was at last night where I embarrassed myself nicely with a dance team thing, and they hadn't seen me in a couple of years. Like, guys, this is great. I'm getting students coming back and visiting me. I don't know. I really enjoy teaching, and that's why, I want to have the business going well, but I really want to be able to spend more time with my kids, my family, and my extended family up at Perry High School.
Awesome. I love that. When I went to high school back in the 90s, we had 5 years and then it switched to 4 up here in Canada. One of my main teachers, I had two that were inspiring to me. One was my computer science teacher. So that's where we learned touring. Yeah. And I designed the Star Wars trilogy in touring, including music for like the entire thing, all in like thousands of lines of codes. And then the other one was Mr. Pels, who was the swim coach, but he also taught Office and typing and things like that. He was a swim coach that couldn't swim, but it was it's ironic, I know. But it was those two people that kind of inspired me to get into computers and to get into my IT field for 20 years. And it was just their passion for wanting the students to do better with themselves and in their lives that kept me on my path, and hence why I'm doing this type of stuff. But I think it's a teacher like yourself that's inspiring, and these students to do what they're doing, I think is just incredible to see. And we need more of those types of teachers these days.
At the beginning of every semester, I put up on my screen a list of my influences as to why I got into teaching. And I list my high school radio broadcast teacher. We had a radio station at my high school in West Des Moines, Valley High School, and Miss McDonald was a big influence on me. I list her up on the screen saying she pulled me out of my shell. I was this quiet little nerdy geek and got me involved in stuff. I list a bunch of other teachers, that my kids' teachers. When I was thinking about what I wanted to do after the disc jockey stuff, the disc jockey magazine, it's like I wanted my weekends back. I mean, mobile DJs work their tails off on the weekends. I decided on teaching because I wanted to make the world a better place for you and for me. That's a Michael Jackson lyric. I wanted to have an influence and see what I would be remembered for. And that's what I want to be remembered for. I want to be remembered for helping kids find their niche, find what they want to do with their lives.
You've done this for 5 years, the Old School Gamer magazine. Is there a standout interview or featured article that you've had that just really deeply resonates with yourself and for your readers?
Yeah, I've got one for you. Okay. Do you remember the Sierra games?
Oh, like yeah.
King's Quest and that kind of stuff? I'm in the middle of just doing miscellaneous work, sending emails back and forth, and I get an email from Ken Williams. Him and Roberta Williams created Sierra, created all those worlds, and then really got out of the industry with a mega $1 billion buyout back in the 90s. I got an email from him out of the blue saying, "You might remember me. I made some video games back in the 80s and 90s. I'd like to talk about something new I'm working on and do something in the magazine." This guy who is, I mean, it was just Ken Williams emailed me. It's not like I reached out to him. I had put him on my mailing list thinking, okay, he'll get emails from me. Maybe he'll respond. And he sends me an email just saying, I was kind of a big thing for a while. If you're interested, I'd love to talk with you some more. That one I remember really well, and that was fantastic. Another one, what else would have hit me? Bushnell, that created Atari. Being able to talk back and forth with him. Being able to have Eugene Jarvis, who made Robotron and a ton of the Midway games back in the day, has been fantastic. I have relationships with a bunch of the guys that made Mortal Kombat, all the character actors that made the original game.
Nice.
It's just fun. I mean, hanging out with people that made these amazing games. Qbert. It's just, I don't know how to describe it best. I mean, I'm thoroughly enjoying each time I have one of these big interviews and able to talk with someone and just talk with them casually. It's like, yeah, they're people too. You put them up on a big pedestal and they're cool, but they're people. And they'll sit and talk with you casually about stuff. We're just trying to document their lives. A lot of these people of that age that made the stuff that Kurt, that you and I played back in the day, they're in their 70s.
Wow.
They're in their 80s. They're maybe the young ones are in their 60s. They need to get their stories documented. And with all the media that's out here now, we're just trying to find a way to do it a little bit differently than what a YouTube channel or a podcast would do. We're trying to find the niche of what a magazine can do better than anybody else. And we are the only retro gaming magazine based in the US. There's one called Retro Gamer in the UK that's fantastic. But of covering retro gaming and retro computing, we're it. I just want to tell a bunch of stories. Then there's also a little bit of new technology that's out there, like services like AntStream, where you can play the old games, and some of these old people doing new stuff like what Ken Williams was doing. He was working on taking the original Colossal Cave Adventure, basically pre-Zork, and he made it into a VR game where you're walking around in it. It's really cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm kind of bubbly and kind of like having the goosebumps on my arm because I love what I do, getting it out there for people, documenting the past.
But that's good to have. We need this type of energy when it comes to these not only these interviews, but also for the magazine. We need to have a showcase of this history and this nostalgia and things that made us excited to be kids again, even though we're older these days. If we don't have that, then why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we passionate about what we're doing? And the fact that geeks and nerds are running the world currently, at least in this decade, is even better for that matter, because the power of nostalgia for us is a powerful thing. But do kids really understand what nostalgia is? Do they actually have that understanding these days?
I think they'll catch a bit of it off of us, but it's really going to come to them in 15, 20 years when they look back at their high school, when they look at their school yearbook and say, oh my gosh, I remember hanging out with him. I remember the teacher, whoever did this and that kind of stuff. And by the way, I'm also in charge of the school yearbook too. So I'm kind of a sales pitch for yearbooks. Remember yearbooks back in the day?
Yeah.
Kids don't think that big of a thing. But what I tell them is Twitter and all these different things aren't going to be around 20 years from now. How are you going to go look up those old pictures? So,
that, or you have like multiple hard drives and you're saving everything constantly, and maybe you'll do a Wayback Machine when you decide to. You try to focus on what makes you positive and what makes you happy, and that's all you can really do in your life, because we're only here for, unfortunately, a short amount of time.
Yeah, it's enjoy it, spread the word, and help other people have joy in their lives. Is what I'm largely about. I want to prep that next generation as to going further with stuff, and then I want to document the past through old school gamers. So it's a fun life. I'm enjoying it. I've got 5 kids who are almost all out of the house now, so now it's time for me to start enjoying things even more. Me and my wife are starting to travel. We're enjoying things.
You kind of touched on the newer technology that's currently coming out here. How does Old School Gamer magazine, track the developments and trends within the gaming community, whether it's retro or whether something becomes retro?
Well, only probably maybe a fourth of our magazine covers current stuff. So that has any kind of a due date or expiration date on things. In the publishing, it's called evergreen content, stuff that's good pretty much forever. And we try to spread the word about those. Mostly they're advertisers in the magazine that are selling subscriptions to services. We talk about the gamer cons that are out there all the time with stuff. But I mean, really, there's not a lot of new technology in our old school stuff, just ways to play the games legally. I don't know if you know, but I mean, most games that are out there, old Nintendo games, all that kind of stuff, can be found on the internet for free. They can be downloaded. They're illegal. You can buy yourself a little Raspberry Pi machine that has every game that's ever on. You can buy it on Amazon. It's illegal. Just like how we used to all steal music before.
Oh, yeah.
Before iTunes found a way to do it. There are some companies now that have come up with legal ways of owning and playing games from back in the day. Like I was saying with music, everybody stole music. Napster came around, made it really big to steal music. And then iTunes came out with a way that you could buy all those songs. Well, there's now places you can legally own these games. You can play them well. There's consoles you can buy for your plug in your modern stuff. The Atari 2600 Plus, I don't know if you heard about this one, allows you to take your old cartridges with all 4K of a game, 4K. Kids that are watching this with your parents, 4K is about as big as a image on your screen, a tiny little file. We had a full game inside this. But there's now ways to play this on your 50-inch super uber plasma OLED TV.
Yeah.
There's cool technology like that allows people to appreciate the past. Nolan Bushnell would say, his games were easy to learn, difficult to master. They were cool games. We used to play stuff on it, and now people have ways of playing those old school games on modern technology. A friend of mine has a service called Argon that allows you to download those ROMs and play them on your phones and play the old school stuff anywhere you want to. And that's fun. That's fun to do. I used to like games that you could play for 5 minutes and get an enjoyable game out of it. Nowadays, you got to spend 4 hours to get to the main storyline of a game, and that's going to down another gigabyte of data for you. Learn to appreciate games for what they are. They're a quick distraction. But then also get out in the real world. Go ride a bike. Get out of the house a little bit and put away your phone. Tell your mom you'll be back you'll be back like what we were. When the street lights go out, you'll be back during the summer. Get off your screens.
Live life.
Yes.
The 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s.
Oh my gosh, this isn't something you want me to prep. My favorite arcade game of all time is Galaga.
Nice.
Okay, it came out, about 82, 83? Because you can play it and enjoy it and just jam with it, and it can be a neat vibe. So if we take from the 80s up to the 90s, Mortal Kombat is my favorite, but it's best to play against a friend. When we used to go to an arcade, playing a racing game was boring, but playing a racing game against your friend that's right next to you was a blast. So I got the 80s and 90s covered of good games. Let's go back to 70s, Breakout. Breakout was one step up from Pong, where you were knocking the blocks off the top of it. I've got the arcade game upstairs in my house. Great, cool game. So there's three good games. And that's real. I only go through the 90s with what I think about. I don't try to think about the modern stuff. Bad games, I don't remember them, honestly. People say E.T. was one of the E.T. for the Atari 2600 was one of the worst games ever made. I know Howard Scott Warsaw. He writes for our magazine. That's the guy that made it. And he did a darn smack-up good job with a month. With a couple little fixes, it would have been a legendary game. Pac-Man for the Atari 2600, again, is called a terrible game. But he had to fit it inside this. What used to be, I don't have an arcade board, a full-size big arcade board ran Pac-Man, and he had to get it down to this. I can't think of the bad games. Okay, I've got something for you there. There were 4 or 5 games that came out for the Atari that were pornographic. That they used the little bits and bytes back then to make sick stuff. And that bothered me. But obviously, I was 8 at the time. I didn't know they existed. Yeah, I can't think of the bad games. I'm sorry. I can't think of that stuff. A good game, like I said with the Nolan Bushnell quote earlier, a good game hooks you in and you have fun with it right away. He also used to say, it rewarded play for the first quarter and the 100th quarter. When I was playing that Gauntlet game or the X-Men game I mentioned up at the arcade with my friends, feeding those quarters into that machine, we'd have you go get a roll of quarters from the guy, throw him a 20, I think it was a roll of quarters or a 10 or whatever it was, and you went through that in 5 minutes. He loved it. Nowadays, like old school arcade here in town, a friend of mine runs an arcade in town. You buy a wristband and you go in and play all you want.
Wow.
There's like 50 games. Or you go to Galloping Ghost in Chicago, Illinois, just outside Chicago. 900 arcade machines, I think it is. One location and like 200 or 300 pinball machines. You pay $25, you play them all day long. There's places like that you can enjoy that, and that's part we cover some of that stuff in the magazine.
I should have given you a heads up. It was kind of a last minute
fine.
addition when I was going through.
I'm a former wedding and school dance DJ. I've learned how to improv.
Beautiful. So what are some of the features of the Old School Gamer magazine? Like, what is the process of putting together a magazine from start to finish? Because I think that's important, especially for those that want to create.
Well, the reason why I was able to get in this magazine and do well with it, where about a half a dozen other people have tried to put together a retro gaming magazine in the last 10 years. The reason why I was able to do it well is I had the experience of running that Mobile Beat, the disc jockey trade magazine. Going off what we used to do there'd always be new stuff coming in. There's a little bit newsworthy stuff that's all put together in the last month. The majority of the issue is planned out 2 to 3 issues in advance. Like right now, the current issue we're working on right now is PS2 versus GameCube. It's at the end of the process. So I'll get back to that in a second. The next 2 issues we're doing, May 2024's issue is about controllers. So what I did was I talked with my reader advisory board. These are people that are a little bit more vested in what we're doing, and said, what all can we cover? Who wants to pick up different things? So what we came up with, and this is a secret, so don't tell anybody, all you people watching at home, innovations and generations of controllers, going from the Atari joystick up to the basic stuff of the late 90s. Horrible controller stories, ones that would like break in your hand when you're playing track and field on the Atari and you're hitting those buttons really, 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 really fast to run and then throw your spear or whatever it was.
Yep.
Nintendo had a ton of different controllers, the evolution of PlayStation controllers, and unique arcade control. Mm-hmm. There are arcade games, I don't know if you remember some of these, that essentially have a fishing pole. You're pulling back and forth on the arcade machine. Unique arcade controllers. So those are all on topic with what that issue is about. The issue after that is in television and online media. So we figure out an overall topic to cover the first half of the magazine. And then everything else is stuff that people pitch to me. They either pitch taking over one of those articles and writing it for us, or they pitch us on just something else. Embracer has a big archive of all kinds of video gaming stuff. We have a piece by Howard Scott Warsaw, the guy who made E.T., about what's in a game. Brian Hall is going to write an article about homebrew stuff. People are still making games for the Atari Lynx. To give you an idea, the homebrew community has made hundreds of games for the Atari, hundreds of games for the television, hundreds of games for the Nintendo 20 years after they came out. Let's see, Brad Feingold is going to write about cheat codes available and stuff. We have a editorial or a piece on Polycade. Here's a more modern thing. Tyler Bushnell, the son of Nolan Bushnell, who started Atari, is coming out with these arcade machines that you can put your own games of in so you can play in the Atari format. So that's all on a spreadsheet. People have agreed to write for them. Some of my writers are paid. Some are volunteer stuff. They're writing these pieces. They submit them to me. I send them to Bill Donahue, who works for us. He's probably the closest thing to an employee I have. He does get paid for it, unlike myself. He edits it, cleans it up editorially, lays it down in a magazine, and I am waiting for another article or 2 for it, but it's like 90% done, this issue that goes to press on Wednesday. He's got it all laid out in InDesign, and I go back, I send it to the various authors, say, look through this, clean it up a little bit, send us back little fixes. I insert advertisements. I send a PDF off to the printer. I post it online so that everybody can read it digitally, and about 2 weeks later, they end up in people's mailboxes. So simultaneously with that timeline, okay, that timeline is the March issue. Then the May issue is already starting to go. And then the July issue, because we come out every other month with the television online stuff, it'll start rolling up in the next couple of weeks. So we're looking out pretty far in advance on what we cover. Even though it's only a 72-page magazine, it involves about 15, 20 people. And we always have to be looking out in advance because it's just the nature of the beast. And then when we're done, we end up with something like this. This is an issue that came out, when was this? Late last year. Beautiful magazine.
It looks incredible.
Actually, let me share a screen with you real quickly.
Yeah, go for it.
So this is a magazine digitally. This is at our, and anybody can check this out, oldschoolgamermagazine.com/sample. Our magazines, what we do is the public can see the first half of any issue of the magazine. Paid subscribers get access to the whole magazine, either digitally or digitally in print. This is the magazine. A little bit of advertisement, a little bit of thank you to our Kickstarter people. There's all the articles that are in here. This one we covered Activision and Namco, plus other stuff. Like how I mentioned earlier, we had the PS2 and GameCube kind of stuff, where Activision started, some of their later history, Audacity that came out of Activision people. Double Dragon was a big Activision game, and Activision games in the 1980s. So there's some of the stuff that was developed. Great writer here, Brett Weiss, who does a lot of stuff for us, just talking about some of the games. Namco, we went back to a history of Namco and how they started up and got going and flew out of there. AntStream Arcade, I mentioned earlier, that's a service you can use to play a bunch of modern games. Advertises with us. They have us write an article about some of the cool games that are on their system. Here's the cheat column that my friend Brad, I've known Brad since 8th grade. We grew up together on these video games. Wrote a cool article about cheat techniques on how to get 128 guys out of Super Mario Brothers. The Konami code, the kind of stuff. Here's a interview with a personality within the video game arena, Retro Existential, Tony, and some of his collection of all the cool kind of stuff he's got. There's an advertisement for a con in Columbus run by a friend of mine, Gary. This is what a magazine looks like. Sometimes we'll embed videos in them. I remember back in the 80s and 90s, we used to get these big boxes with all kinds of extra stuff in them for a video game to kind of add to the experience. But we had a column covering that kind of stuff for a while.
That's awesome.
This is what it looks like. Here's a part of our computer coverage. We're starting to get more of that. Video Games Monthly is a service where you get a box of games. Here's a guy talking about his collection. It's fun, and I'll keep doing it as long as I can keep enjoying it, is pretty much what it comes down to.
That's awesome. I love it. Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Trying to think of someone else than the obvious. I'll give two answers. One, my life before my wife, and then the second one will be about my wife. Before I met my wife, it was a lady named Lil McDonald, I think I mentioned earlier, my radio teacher. She pulled me out of my shell and made me outgoing, made me learn to love students, learn to love what I'm doing. And that's, I know she was very proud of me when I got into teaching. Second one is my wife. I met her when I was working at a radio station back in 1991. And for obvious reasons, I wouldn't be doing any of the stuff I'm doing, enjoying things as much as I would. Without meeting her, my life would have been dramatically different. But God set her aside for me. I was always destined to meet her.
From a professional standpoint, you are, of course, a talented teacher. You are a owner of an amazing Old School Gamer magazine company, and you're still passionate about video games to this day, and hopefully you keep passionate about it until your final days. But professionally, you're successful in that regard. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
Yes, on many different regards. Here goes something a little bit deep. You can say what you want to do with this. I've helped bring people to Christ. I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I've been successful in that area. I've been successful with my family and bringing them up the right ways and getting them on their own paths to their futures. Some of them still have some bumps in the road to get there. I've been successful there. I've been successful at school, even though I've only been doing it for 5 years. I'm looking forward to about another 15 more years and being successful with that. I've been able to help a couple industries, the disc jockey industry for about 20 years, and now the video game industry with recognizing its past.
The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
Trying not to stick on them too long. Okay, very short story here. My exit from the DJ industry was not very good, but the world was all turned upside down at the time. The last disc jockey industry convention I was supposed to run was supposed to happen in March 2020. What happened in March 2020? COVID-19. My last conference was due to be the week of spring break, which is literally about this week every year for those of us in the Midwest. And my last convention was supposed to start on the Monday after the world shut down, that Friday. It was a failure of mine, but not a failure I could control. So what we had to do at the time was I called back my staff that wasn't in Vegas already, which is just one guy, and some other people were about to board airplanes, and said, we got to pull off some kind of Zoom level conference or something just to complete what we're doing. Yeah, it was a failure not of my own. I just had to deal with it. It was something to get past. And I'm still paying for it a little bit, and I still go back to it. I mention it like this. But what I bring out of it is that I was stronger because of it, and I improved myself. I improved my outlook on life and found my next mission. If you do drop down and fail, find a way to get yourself back up. Remember and learn from your failures.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way, whether it's as a designer, a graphic designer, a writer, an artist, something in the creative field, maybe you've inspired them down their path to what they're going to work on in the future. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
Because of the teaching stuff, I'm seeing this already with things. I've got a couple students. I've got one I'll exactly name, Charles. He's enjoyed my classes. He's done well with it. And he's literally, because of myself and 3 or 4 other people at my school, 3 or 4 other teachers, looking to become a teacher. He sees what we've done and how we've enjoyed what we're doing, encouraging him to go further with stuff. It really comes down to showing that you enjoy what you do, truly enjoying it, and expressing it to other people. It's really about passing the baton. I mean, I don't think I'll ever completely retire because I don't want to just sit on a couch and do nothing. I'll always be out there doing something, but it's important to help people carry on the traditions. I'm looking forward to seeing grandkids someday, maybe even great-grandkids and stuff, and know that they were set on the path because of what me and my wife did with their parents.
If your life was a video game, what would its title be? And what would its soundtrack be?
Soundtrack, I'd like to have songs by the Beatles. I don't know. Or that, or have Paul McCartney write something for me. Maybe a little bit of John Williams at the beginning of it. You know, some big triumphant kind of thing. Title. Adventures in Life. The Story of a Nerd from Iowa. I don't know. Something to that effect. I've always been on that nerdy vibe with stuff. And I'm out here in Iowa. People consider it flyover zone. I like where I live, and I like everything about it. But yeah, that's the best I got for you.
Well, Ryan, I do hate to say it, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Very cool. Spread the word about Old School Gamer when you have a chance. oldschoolgamer.com. Get the free subscription if you just go on the site. And do mention that you heard about us from Two Geeks Talking so we can help spread the word about all the good things that are out there. But yeah, oldschoolgamer.com, or catch us at when these gamer cons coming up. We have a lot of fun. Love to talk with you guys more.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talk. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others, quite literally, on our website, tgtmedia.com or twogeekstalking.com. That's TWO, not the number 2. Website's going through a rebuild, quite literally. So go to our YouTube channel. That's always updated, youtube.com/TGTmedia. The podcast is back after 12 or so years. Get that at twogeekstalking.podbean.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.